My name is Gerald Hartman, and I want to tell you something that took me 63 years to learn that the most powerful thing a man can do is nothing. Just stop, walk away, close the app, put down the phone, drive home in silence. Because sometimes the kindest thing you've ever done for someone is the very thing that's been destroying them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, brothers and sisters, because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand who I was before it happened. I spent 31 years as a high school shop teacher in Clarksville, Tennessee. Taught woodworking, metalworking, basic electrical. I wasn't a wealthy man, never pretended to be, but I was a man who knew how to make things with his hands, and I believed there was dignity in that. I believed you could look at a thing you'd built and feel something clean and true about yourself. When my wife Dorothy passed 11 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, I threw myself into the workshop I'd built in the backyard of our little house on Fenwick Road. It wasn't much, just a converted two-car garage with good lighting and a proper workbench. But it was mine. And in those first terrible years without Dorothy, it was the only place I knew how to breathe. My son Mitchell was 34 when his mother died. He'd moved to Nashville about 8 years earlier with his wife. Cassandra, people called her Cassie, and they had a little girl named Rose who was just turning 4 the spring Dorothy passed. I want you to understand that in those early years, I drove to Nashville every other weekend without being asked. I sat on their floor and played with Rose. I brought Mitchell money when things were tight. I fixed their leaking gutters. I repainted their kitchen when Cassie decided she hated the color. I did all of this because I loved them, and because I was a man who expressed love through showing up and doing things. What I didn't understand then, what took me years to see clearly, was that I had trained Mitchell to see my presence as a service, not as a relationship, as a service he was entitled to, like a utility that just runs in the background until you notice it's gone. The first time Mitchell asked me for serious money, Rose was 6 years old. He and Cassie had found a house they wanted to buy, a 4-bedroom place in a good school district, nicer than anything I'd ever owned, and they were short on the down payment. I had about $40,000 in savings at the time. Dorothy's life insurance, some retirement funds I'd been careful with. I gave him $18,000. I told him it was a gift. I told him not to worry about paying it back. He hugged me in the driveway and called me the best father a man could ask for. That was the last time Mitchell said anything like that to me for a very long time. Over the next 4 years, I helped pay for Rose's private school tuition because Cassie had decided the public school in their district wasn't good enough. I co-signed on a car loan for Cassie when her credit score was too low to qualify on her own. I sent money for a family vacation I wasn't invited on. I paid for the repair of a deck that had rotted because Mitchell had ignored it for 3 summers. I'm not telling you this to sound like a martyr, brothers and sisters. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the shape of what I had built, not a relationship, but a financial arrangement that I had mistaken for one. Rose was the reason I kept going back. That little girl was everything to me. By the time she was 8, she was spending part of every summer with me in Clarksville, and we would go out to the workshop together and I'd teach her how to use a saw safely, how to sand along the grain, how to measure twice and cut once. She was patient and curious in a way that reminded me of Dorothy. She had Dorothy's hands small and precise. The summer she turned 9, we built a birdhouse together from pine scraps, and she painted it yellow with a red roof, and we hung it in the backyard on a post I'd set in concrete. She named the first bird that came to it, called it Gerald Jr. I want you to remember that birdhouse. Hold on to it. It matters. The trouble started, or rather, I started to see the trouble that had always been there the year Rose turned 10. Mitchell called me in February, his voice tight and careful. In that way I'd learned meant he needed something. He told me his company had downsized, that he'd been let go, that things were difficult. He asked if I could cover Rose's spring tuition payment, $8,000, and said they'd pay me back when he landed something new. I said yes without hesitating. Of course I said yes. But something made me keep a note of it this time. Just a small thing. I wrote it down in the back of a notebook I kept on my workbench, under the heading, Loans to Mitch. It was the first time I'd used that word. Loans, not gifts. He didn't pay it back. He found a new job by June, better paying than the last one. And by August, he and Cassie had booked another family vacation, Hilton Head this time, and the $8,000 was never mentioned again. I didn't bring it up. I didn't know how. I had spent my whole life teaching Mitchell that money from me came without conditions, without expectations, without any need to account for it. I couldn't suddenly change the terms without it feeling like an ambush, and I didn't want to be that kind of father. So I stayed quiet, and I kept showing up, and I kept paying. The summer Rose was 12. She came to stay with me for 3 weeks in July, and it was the best summer I'd had since Dorothy. We expanded the workshop garden together. We built a small bench for the back porch. We drove out to Montgomery Bell State Park and hiked the trails. On the last night before Mitchell came to pick her up, Rose sat next to me on that back porch bench we'd built, and she said, "Grandpa, I want to live here." I laughed and put my arm around her and said she could visit as much as she liked. I didn't know that summer would be the last long visit we'd ever have. The following year, Cassie enrolled Rose in a competitive dance program that consumed most of her summers. I understood. Kids get busy, but I noticed the calls from Rose became shorter, less frequent. When I visited Nashville, Rose was usually at practice or at a friend's house. Mitchell and Cassie were cordial. They were always cordial, but I noticed I was being slotted into the schedule rather than welcomed into the house. There's a difference. You can feel it. The money request continued on a different frequency now. More sophisticated, more specific. Mitchell wanted to refinance their house and asked if I would co-sign because his debt-to-income ratio was too high. I said yes. Cassie was starting a small online boutique and needed startup capital, $6,000 for inventory. I wrote the check. Mitchell's car needed a new engine, which cost more than the car was worth. And could I help? Yes, I said. Yes, because what else do you say? This is your son. This is your granddaughter's father. You don't say no to family. I want to stop here and speak directly to you, fathers, because I know some of you are sitting where I was sitting. You've told yourself the same thing I told myself, that this is just what fathers do, that the older generation supports the younger one. That's how it works. That's what family means. And there is truth in that. There is. But there is a version of that truth that becomes a kind of lie. And I was living the lie without knowing it. I was not helping Mitchell grow. I was helping him stay exactly where he was, comfortable and ungrateful, and fundamentally certain that I would always be there with my checkbook when the gap between his life and his appetites got too wide. By the time Rose was 14, I had transferred, and I did the math later, carefully, at my workbench with a legal pad, just over $94,000 to Mitchell and Cassie over a 10-year period. Not counting the $18,000 for the down payment. Not counting the cosign loans. Not counting the physical labor, the weekends of my retirement. The gas money for 200 trips up and down, I-24. $94,000. Now, I need to tell you about the birthday party. Rose turned 15 in April. I'd been planning for weeks. I built her something in the workshop, a proper jewelry box in cherry wood, with a fitted interior in green velvet and small brass hinges that I'd ordered special. I'd been working on it since February. I drove to Nashville the Saturday before her birthday with the jewelry box wrapped in brown paper on the passenger seat and a card I'd spent an hour writing. I pulled into their driveway at 11 in the morning. Mitchell had told me in a text, not a phone call, a text that the party started at noon. I figured I'd come early, help set up, spend some time with Rose before her friends arrived. Cassie opened the door before I could knock. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has arrived at the wrong address. Not hostility, exactly something worse. Inconvenience. "Gerald," she said, "we weren't expecting you until later." I told her Mitchell had said noon. She said the party was for Rose's friends and their parents, that it was going to be crowded, that it might be better if I stopped by another time. Maybe Sunday, she said. Rose would be free Sunday afternoon. I stood on that front step with a cherrywood jewelry box I'd spent 6 weeks building, and I heard my son's wife tell me to come back Sunday. I said, "Is Mitchell home?" She said he was getting things ready, and it wasn't a good time. I stood there for a moment. I could hear music from inside the house. I could hear Rose laughing somewhere in the backyard. I could hear the specific laughter of my granddaughter, the one I had taught to sand along the grain, the one who had named a bird Gerald Jr., the one who had told me she wanted to live with me, and I was standing on the front step being turned away. I said, "Would you give this to her, please?" And I held out the jewelry box. Cassie took it without looking at it. "Of course," she said. "I'll tell her you stopped by." I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't call Mitchell. I didn't knock on the door again. I just sat there in my truck in the April sunshine, and I felt something change in me. Not break, change. Like a gear shifting. Something quiet and final. Then I drove home to Clarksville. That evening, Mitchell sent me a text. It said, "Sorry you couldn't make it today, Dad. Rose loved the box." No phone call. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just that one sentence, as though I had simply been unable to attend. as though I had some scheduling conflict, as though Cassie had not looked at me like a utility man who had come on the wrong day. I didn't respond to the text. I went out to the workshop. I stood at my workbench for a long time, not building anything, just standing there. Then I opened the notebook with the heading, Loans to Mitch, and I looked at the numbers I'd written there over the years. Then I opened my laptop and I logged into my bank account. There were 2 automatic transfers I had set up years ago that still ran every month. One was a contribution to Rose's college savings account, $300 a month, which I had been sending since she was 7 years old. The other was a monthly transfer of $1,100 to Mitchell and Cassie's joint account, which I had originally set up to help cover their mortgage after Mitchell's layoff and had simply never canceled. That was 4 years ago. He had been employed, well employed, for 3.5 years. I sat at my workbench and I did the math. $1,100 a month for 41 months. I had been sending them $45,100 that they had never once acknowledged, never once thanked me for, never once mentioned stopping. I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I moved my cursor to the transfer. I selected it. The bank asked me, "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer?" I clicked yes. I kept the college savings transfer. That was for Rose. That had nothing to do with Mitchell and Cassie. I would not let my anger at them cost that girl her education. But the $1,100? That was done. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in years. The call came 8 days later. Not from Mitchell, from Cassie. She didn't say hello. She said, "What did you do?" Her voice was a frequency I had never heard from her before, thin and high and jagged at the edges. I said I didn't know what she meant. She said the mortgage payment had bounced. I said I was aware of that. There was a silence, and then she said, in a different voice, entirely slower, more careful, "Gerald, there must be some kind of mistake with the bank." "There's no mistake," I said. Another silence. "Mitchell needs to talk to you," she said. "He knows where to find me," I said, and I hung up. Mitchell called 40 minutes later. He was not using the careful voice Cassie had used. Mitchell was using a voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, loud and self-righteous, and slightly frantic underneath the aggression. He told me I was being childish. He told me I was punishing Rose to get back at him, which was not true, and he knew it was not true. He told me that what Cassie had said to me at the door was a misunderstanding, that the party had been small, that there simply wasn't room. I let him talk. I did not interrupt. When he was finished, I said, "Mitchell, you have been taking $1,100 from me every month for over 3 years. When did you plan on telling me you didn't need it anymore?" Silence. "When did you plan on saying thank you?" I said. "When did you plan on saying anything at all?" He told me I was being dramatic. He told me he'd been meaning to talk to me about the transfer. He told me things had been busy. Busy. $45,000 and he'd been busy. "I'm not angry," I told him, and I meant it. I was not angry. I was something else, something quieter and more final. "I'm not punishing you. I'm just done. I'm done paying for things that aren't mine to pay for anymore. Your mortgage is your mortgage. Your life is your life. I love you, Mitchell, but I'm done." He said some things after that. I won't repeat all of them because they don't matter and because some of them were said in pain, and I don't believe in cataloging the things people say in pain. But I will tell you that near the end of that conversation, he said that if I wanted to see Rose, I could do it through them, and they would decide when and how. That was when I understood the full shape of what I had been living inside. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Harder in some ways than losing Dorothy, because when Dorothy died, I had grief and I had purpose. The grief was clean. The love was not in question. This was something murkier. I had given my son everything I had, including my own dignity, for years, and now he was using my granddaughter as a lever. I did not call. I did not send money. I did not drive to Nashville. I went to my workshop every morning. I built things: a rocking chair for a neighbor, a set of kitchen cabinets for a woman at my church, a bookshelf I donated to the public library. I took long walks in the evenings. I started cooking properly for the first time since Dorothy. Real meals, not just sandwiches over the sink. I called my sister in Memphis every Sunday. I began to understand, slowly and with some pain, that the life I had in Clarksville was actually a good life, and that I had been treating it as a waiting room for a relationship that was never going to be what I needed it to be. I'm telling you this so you understand what I mean when I say the next part wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was just the natural consequence of things finally being what they were. About 4 months after I canceled the transfer, I got a call from a woman named Patricia Ellison, who identified herself as a financial counselor at a nonprofit that worked with families in debt. She told me with my permission my name had come up in relation to an account review that Mitchell and Cassie had listed me as a financial resource on a loan application they were pursuing. They had apparently told the lender that I was a co-signer in ongoing financial support, which was no longer true. I told Patricia Ellison the truth, that I had no ongoing financial relationship with my son, that I had not agreed to co-sign anything new, that any previous arrangements had been terminated. She thanked me and said she was sorry for the situation. About 2 weeks after that call, Mitchell called me again. This time he was not loud. He was quiet in the way people get quiet when the ground has shifted under them and they haven't found their footing yet. He told me the loan had fallen through. He told me they were behind on the mortgage. He asked me, and I want to be precise here because the exact words matter, he asked me if we could start over. "What does that mean to you?" I said. "Starting over." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I've been taking you for granted, Dad. I think Cassie and I both have. And I think I've known it for a while, and I didn't want to look at it." I sat with that. "I want Rose to know her grandfather," he said. "She asks about you. She still has the jewelry box on her dresser. I want you to know that I did not say yes immediately. I did not say, 'Of course, son, all is forgiven. Let's pretend.' I am not built that way. And I don't think you build anything real on that kind of pretending. I told Mitchell that I was open to rebuilding something, but that it would look different. That I would not be a financial resource. That I expected to be treated as a person, not a service. That if Rose wanted a relationship with me, I wanted it to be real. Her calling me because she wanted to, not because she was asked to." He said he understood. The first time Rose called me on her own was about 3 weeks after that conversation. She called on a Tuesday evening for no particular reason. She told me about a project she was working on at school, some kind of history presentation. She asked how the workshop was. She asked if Gerald Jr., the bird, was still coming to the birdhouse. I told her I thought so. I told her the birdhouse was still hanging on the post, but I'd need her to come down and check on it herself. She said she would. She did. She came down to Clarksville in October with Mitchell without Cassie, who I suspect needed more time, and that was fine. And we walked out to the backyard, and there was a chickadee sitting right there on the birdhouse roof like it had been expecting us. Rose laughed and grabbed my arm, and I thought, right then, with my granddaughter laughing in the October light, holding onto my arm, that this was the thing I had almost traded away. Not by leaving. By staying too long in the wrong arrangement and calling it love. We had lunch after that. Mitchell helped me replace a rotted board on the back fence. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the hard months. We just worked side by side in the afternoon, and it felt, for the first time in a long time, like something real. I am 63 years old. I live on Fenwick Road in Clarksville with my workshop and my garden and my Sunday calls to my sister. I am not a wealthy man. I have enough. I built most of what I own with these hands, and I don't owe anything to anyone. And I sleep without trouble most nights, which is a kind of wealth that doesn't show up in any account balance. What I want to tell you, if you are a father in the place I was in, if you are the one who always shows up, who always says yes, who has confused providing with being loved, is this: the thing you are afraid of is not as bad as the thing you are living. The silence after you say no is not the end of the relationship. Sometimes it is the beginning of an honest one. Sometimes your child needs to feel the weight of their own life before they can see you clearly enough to actually miss you. I didn't stop paying Mitchell's bills to punish him. I stopped because I finally understood that every check I wrote was a message. And the message I had been sending for 20 years was, you don't have to do this yourself. You don't have to be accountable. I will always be here to catch you, regardless of how you treat me. That is not love. That is a very convincing imitation of love that does real damage to everyone involved. Real love has some shape to it, some edge. It says, I am here and I believe in you. And because I believe in you, I am not going to keep doing for you what you should be doing for yourself. Real love sometimes drives home with an empty passenger seat and a quiet that feels like grief, but is actually something else. The beginning of self-respect. Mitchell has his own mortgage payment now. His own. He told me last month that paying it himself, on time, for the first time in years, felt different than he expected. I asked him how it felt. He said it felt like something he'd actually built. I know that feeling, son. I know exactly what that feels like. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, fathers and mothers, grandparents who have given and given and given until you forgot what it felt like to have anything left for yourself, I want you to know that it is not too late to stop. It is not too late to close the account, to sit in your truck in the driveway, to drive home in the April sunshine and sleep better than you have in years. The workshop is still there. The birdhouse is still hanging on the post. Gerald Jr. is still showing up, reliable as anything, needing nothing from me but a place to land. That, friends, is enough. That is more than enough.